So you've got 20 minutes to present. You can decide who wants to present first.
Greg said he was going to go first, I think.
Thank you for being here.
Jamie told me I'm going first, which is okay. So I guess I'll just give you a bit of further context of who I am, what I'm doing, maybe why I'm here. I hold a very privileged position at the National Gallery of Canada as the O'Dane Curator of Indigenous Art and head of the Department of Indigenous Art at the National Gallery of Canada. That's a position I've had there since 2007, and I've been working at the gallery in different positions since 2000. And most of what I've been doing at the gallery since starting there in the Canadian Art Department as a curatorial assistant even was to work on the representation of art made by Aboriginal peoples in the National Gallery of Canada. So first in the historical Canadian galleries to do things that maybe we'll want to talk about later, to do something like take a snowshoe and put it next to an oil painting, and have them be looked at in equal terms. And then moving from historical Canadian art to contemporary art, and working on the acquisition of contemporary artworks by Aboriginal peoples for the permanent collection of the gallery. And then when we got to have our own department, a Department of Indigenous Art, we used that word Indigenous to signal that we were expanding the collecting mandate outside of North America, that we were thinking about Indigenous peoples around the world, and that we would then begin to buy artworks by contemporary Indigenous artists from anywhere in the world. And then we started to do that, and this exhibition that's happening now, Sagahan, is really in some ways a culmination of that momentum, that we've now put together this massive exhibition that is 82 artists, contemporary Indigenous artists from many places all around the world, over 180 works, and a lot of those works that are part of this exhibition, which is we know to be the largest ever exhibition of contemporary Indigenous art anywhere ever in the world. So it's a very historical moment, and one I hope you get a chance to go by the gallery to see. But it's the culmination of, in some sense, building that collection and having an opportunity to show those works, and to really challenge people's ideas about what contemporary Indigenous art can be. And that relates to the topic that we're talking about today, when we have these kinds of categories, and they're not categories of our own making, but they're categories that we constantly have this issue with, because our work doesn't fit into those categories in a neat way. And in some ways, I think the most productive thing to do would be to dismiss those categories altogether and just start to talk about our art as what we do. From what I learned from my Mohawk language teacher, David Gantawako Miracle, was that we talk about this idea that in our Aboriginal languages we don't have the word for art, but we have, and that's sometimes used as a way to dismiss art as a category. That is something that it's used as a way to say, well, you Aboriginal peoples, you never made art, so obviously you only made ethnographic objects, and that's why your work is only collected by museums. But if we look at it in a different way, that the things that we produce, the beautiful things that we make, whether they be quill work or beadwork or paintings or sculpture or performances, are all part of what we do. The way we do things, the beautiful way that we do things, that concept as an Indigenous concept then we don't have to deal with breaking things down and trying to fit them into these uncomfortable boxes. And I think that that Sagahan does that in some ways. That if you go there and you see the painting, for example, by Christy Belcour, who's a Métis artist living in Ontario, that she's constructed this painting out of dots of paint, which is a reference to beads, which is a reference to her culture and the Métis people as the flower beadwork people. And yet, it's a painting hanging on a wall, which is a format that is readily accepted in a fine art gallery. Something that fits in easily. It's not questioned by these categories that we create. But then you look at another work. Let me pick one.
What about Michael's? I always think that's an interesting one.
Michael Pericofai.
Mm-hmm.
I think I'm really thinking of a work that would be
Nicholas Gallinen?
difficult in terms of what we're talking about craft.
Nicholas Gallinen.
Nicholas Gallinen?
Because he has the masks.
Oh yeah, okay, that's a good one. Thank you. So another work that kind of mixes up those categories would be these masks so they first appear as masks, as in a tradition of carved masks. But then when you look closer, you realize that these masks have a really kind of unusual construction. And what they are masks created in a sculptural way out of individually cutting the pages of books, and so to create a profile that is a mask shape, and then the hair is added, and they look every part like a quote unquote traditional mask. I hesitate to use that word as well, but when you read the label, you realize that this particular mask, a raven mask, is carved from a Bible. So it's a way of taking a reference to customary practices, to a way that we know and that we're comfortable in looking at and viewing as a form of important cultural expression, but doing it in a different way that makes you think about that object on many, many different levels. How does a Bible transform into a mask? So those kinds of things I think are really interesting. Mm-hmm. Now I want you to say something.
Okay. So my role here today is to talk about as a artist. It's funny because I've never really looked at myself as being a crafter, even though a lot of the things that I do are considered in a lot of categories as being craft. One of them is beadwork, and so I brought a pair of vamps here to show you some of the kind of beadwork that I do, which is really inspired through Métis women's patterns and imagery. And I also do fish scale work. So I brought some fish scales up to show. And one of the things I guess I wanted to give a perspective of is sort of what we do when we, it's not just simply, for the fish scales, it's not just simply taking scales and gluing them onto a fabric. One of the, what we have to do is, when I first started, first of all, it was really hard. I thought of this as being a connection to being away from my community. And so I found the people that I had heard, through other people that do this kind of work. And so I would just meet up with them in random places. MJ Belcourt, I don't know if you know her, but she's my first teacher of fish scale work. And so what it includes is a lot of visiting. So we visit a lot of people. We talk to a lot of people about who does what, because fish scale art is one of those that's really rare, and it actually comes specifically from Lac La Biche, Alberta, which is my community. And not all Métis people do it. Again, it's specifically for people in Lac La Biche. And once we found all of the people that I needed to talk to about it, to maintain the craft or to maintain the art, we'd have to go home and we have to visit with different people, find out how they're. Those are my kids. Sorry. find out how. Okay. Sorry. So we have to find out, like how their family's doing, how their kids are doing. Sorry. Okay. Hunter, Riley, Jacob. Quiet. Hey. Shh. Okay. So anyway, yeah, we have to find out, how their family's doing, what babies were born, who passed away, and then we go in to start talking about the fish scale work. And every time I go back, it's something new. It's about the dyeing techniques. It's about how to manipulate the porcupine quills with the scales. It's about how to manipulate the porcupine hair with the scales. It's about where does it come from? When did we first start doing this? So every time I go back to my community and talk to different people, it's more knowledge, and so it's about how to make a rose instead of a daffodil. All of those different things. It's not simply all in one session, like going to a university class and learning all these things all at once. And that's the process. Before you even get to being creative and putting things down on fabric. So it's an intense process, and I've come to really respect a lot of this kinds of indigenous art. So that's the fish scale. With the beadwork, I find it really fascinating because it's not only aesthetically for me, it's just really very beautiful. To learn about that a 5-petal flower, anytime you see a 5-petal flower in a Métis art piece, that has reference to a female Métis woman specifically. So, and when I do my own beadwork, I make sure that if there's a little brand new flower that has to do somehow, the story of this image has to do with an infant. And then if there's a bud and a bigger bud, it has to do with stages of life. So the symbolism also for me in the beadwork is it has a lot of meaning. And I found this out, something really specifically that caught my attention was a friend of mine who is a lawyer. Her name's Kathy Hodgson Smith. She was doing some research into the travel routes of Métis and talking about rights to certain lands and rights to certain Aboriginal rights, so hunting wherever they were going. And so she, in her research to find out how Métis people are connected to these rights, she discovered that the back of the jackets that were made out of buckskin that had all of the beadwork on it were actually maps. And so if you were to take off the jacket and kind of lay it out on the floor, the vines became rivers and the flowers became specific places. So it reminds me also of something a wonderful woman, Madeline Dion Stout, always used to say. She always used to say, to be a proud Aboriginal person, to show that you should decorate yourself. And so that meant wearing the jewelry, that meant, somehow wearing your history or your knowledge on you, like those jackets. So decorating yourself. And it's not just about aesthetics. Decorating yourself is about your history. Decorating yourself is about all of the stories that you have about Métis women or the infants that were born that year or whatever it was. And so for me, all of those together, that's a traditional Indigenous art. But I don't know, traditional for me still, I know Greg had hesitated to use that word. Traditional is still, to me, it doesn't mean that it's something that we did a long time ago. Traditional for me means it has connections to what our first, seeds of creativity and to how so traditional to me it doesn't mean that it's not contemporary, I guess is what I'm saying. So, yeah, I think that's how I would describe my experience with Indigenous arts.
So we'll take a couple of questions and the next speaker.
Jamie, how is the fish scale represented? How are the fish scales and those things used? Are these in a circus embroidery type context?
Oh, it's a good question. If anybody wants to see what it looks like, I have some displayed on the racks back there. So it's displayed as little flowers. So everything, a lot of the women did was a lot of the flowers. So anything that you would see around you would put them in the form of flowers. And so it comes from the Grey Nuns showing embroidery work and things like that. But it's on the context of framed images. I've never seen it on moccasins or on jackets or anything like that. It's relatively new, actually. So it is.
Too fragile for.
No, these are the same, and that's the other great thing is that you get to learn a lot about fish and body parts when you're talking to the elders. But it's the same material that's made out of your nails and your hair, so it's really quite strong. And in fact, could be put on moccasins. It's just such a rare art, and it is fairly new, like early 1800s. That there hasn't been, and because it's rare, there hasn't been that time to experiment with it. So the pieces that I mostly see are framed, but I've been experimenting using fish scales in other ways and alongside other mediums, which are not the norm, I guess. Yeah, yet.